She'll be fine.
Why do I feel like something is wrong?
She'll be fine.
Why do I feel like something is wrong?
She'll be fine, the husband said softly, but something in his voice made the pregnant wife pause. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the closer she came to the door, the harder her heart began to beat. "Why do I feel like something is wrong?" she whispered, one hand resting on her stomach. In the next few moments, the life she thought was safe would begin to shift, and nothing around her would ever feel the same again. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe and leave a like. It means everything to us. Please share this video with someone you care about and switch on post notifications so you won't miss any future videos. Also, comment where you're watching from. Thank you for always supporting. Now, relax and let's begin. Natalie Vaughn lived in the kind of marriage people admired from a distance. Her husband, Ruben Vaughn, was handsome, wealthy, polished, and always knew how to make others feel welcome. Their home was large, beautiful, and always glowing with quiet luxury. At gatherings, Ruben kept a gentle hand at Natalie's back and asked, "Are you comfortable?" in a tone that made older women smile with approval. Now heavily pregnant after years of waiting, Natalie often rested her palm over her stomach and whispered to her unborn child, "You came at the right time." She believed this baby would make their home even warmer and their bond even deeper. Yet beneath the polished calm, something small had begun to shift. Reuben still smiled, still provided, still said the right things, but there were moments when his eyes looked far away, even while he sat beside her. Late at night, Natalie would wake and find him on his phone, speaking softly in another room. "Work," he would say, returning to bed with a practiced calm. She wanted to believe him. Pregnancy had made her heart more tender, and she did not want worry to touch the peace she had waited so long to feel. So she kept choosing trust, even when silence lingered strangely between them. Rosa Hale had become a constant part of Natalie's days. She arrived with fruit, soft blankets, baby name suggestions, and the kind of laughter that made lonely afternoons feel lighter. She had accompanied Natalie to doctor visits when Reuben was busy and knew exactly which tea helped with nausea and which pillows eased her back pain. "You would think you're the father," Natalie once joked gently, and Rosa laughed, saying, "Please, I'm only trying to earn the title of favorite aunt." It felt safe to have her there. Natalie had known Rosa for years, trusted her deeply, and never imagined that closeness could become something dangerous. Rosa moved around the house with easy familiarity. She knew which cabinet held the tea, which guest room had the softest light, and even which side of the bed Reuben preferred when reading. Sometimes Natalie noticed how naturally Rosa and Reuben spoke to each other, finishing small thoughts or exchanging glances too quick to understand. But whenever that faint discomfort rose, Natalie brushed it aside. "I'm just tired," she told herself. "I'm carrying too much emotion these days." Trust made those moments seem harmless. Rosa was her friend. Reuben was her husband. Natalie believed love and loyalty lived safely inside those truths. This child had not come easily. There had been years of hope, waiting, quiet disappointment, and brave smiles after difficult doctor visits. Natalie had learned how to hold herself together in soft ways, how to fold sorrow into prayer, and still move through ordinary days with grace. Some nights she had cried alone before washing her face and returning to dinner as though nothing had broken inside her. So now, with life growing gently beneath her heart, she treated each kick like a miracle. "You are loved already," she whispered one evening, smiling through tears. To her, this baby was not only joy. It was healing finally taking shape. Because of that, Natalie became more protective of peace than ever before. She avoided stressful conversations, overlooked small discomforts, and chose calm where she might once have asked questions. When Reuben seemed distracted, she told herself fatherhood must be weighing on him. When Rosa came too often, she decided it was only care. She wanted laughter around the baby, softness around the nursery, and warmth inside her home. She did not realize that while she was protecting peace, others were quietly building secrets in the same rooms where she dreamed of lullabies. Her silence came from love, but it gave betrayal the quiet space it needed to grow. Reuben knew how to look devoted. At dinners, he pulled out Natalie's chair before she reached it. At family gatherings, he touched her shoulder gently and said, "She shouldn't stand too long," earning admiring smiles from everyone nearby. Older relatives praised him openly. "Natalie, you are blessed," one aunt said. Natalie smiled and lowered her eyes, wanting to believe it fully. Sometimes Reuben kissed her forehead so tenderly that she felt ashamed for ever doubting him. In public, he was a man prepared for fatherhood, steady and thoughtful, the kind of husband people pointed to when speaking about marriage with admiration. But when the doors closed and the guests were gone, his warmth often faded too quickly. He became impatient over little things, distracted during conversations, and strangely careful whenever Natalie asked direct questions. "You're overthinking again," he would say with a calm smile that ended the moment without truly answering her. She started to notice that his tenderness often appeared at the exact moments others were watching, then disappeared when they were alone. It was not enough to accuse, not enough to explain, yet enough to settle uneasily in her heart. Natalie kept telling herself pregnancy made feelings larger. Still, a quiet restlessness had begun to live inside her. The first thing Natalie noticed was not romance but money. One morning, while reviewing household expenses with sleepy eyes and a cup of warm milk beside her, she saw several entries that did not make sense. Small amounts had been moved under vague labels like home upkeep and miscellaneous support. At first, she assumed it was a simple accounting error. Staff purchases, perhaps. A delayed receipt. Even so, something about the pattern stayed with her. That afternoon she asked lightly, "Reuben, did we approve extra renovations recently?" He barely looked up from his laptop. "Probably routine adjustments," he said. "Mike handles those details. Don't burden yourself with them." Natalie did not let the thought go completely. She began quietly taking screenshots and making notes, telling herself it was only caution for the baby's sake. If something financial was wrong, she needed to understand it before childbirth added more pressure. She did not suspect an affair. Not then. She simply feared Reuben might be hiding a business problem or making private decisions that could affect their child's future. Her growing care turned into a small secret of her own. Each saved statement felt almost silly in the beginning. She did not know those quiet records, gathered in tenderness and concern, would one day become part of the very shield that protected her. Once Natalie started paying attention, little moments seemed to gather around her. Ruben and Rosa sometimes stopped talking when she entered a room. Rosa would casually mention details about Ruben's schedule that Natalie had never been told. Once, while passing the study, Natalie heard Rosa say, "You should rest before the call," in a tone so familiar it made her pause. When she stepped inside, both of them turned too quickly. "You startled us," Rosa said with a smile. Natalie answered softly, "I didn't mean to." The room returned to normal, yet something inside her remained slightly unsettled, like a picture frame no longer hanging perfectly straight. Even then, she resisted dark thoughts. She felt almost guilty for noticing. Pregnancy had made her more emotional, more alert, sometimes even tearful over small things. "Maybe I'm becoming too sensitive," she whispered to herself that night while folding tiny baby clothes. She could not bear the idea of becoming suspicious without reason. Reuben was her husband. Rosa was her closest friend, so she buried the discomfort gently, as though hiding it would make it disappear. But silence has a way of feeding what it protects. While Natalie kept choosing trust, the people around her were growing bolder in the very spaces where she still believed love lived. The mansion remained beautiful, but it no longer felt as comforting as it once had. Sunlight still poured across the marble floors each morning, and fresh flowers still appeared in crystal vases, yet Natalie began to feel lonely inside rooms that had once soothed her. Reuben had started spending more time at home, but somehow he felt less present than before. He answered calls in low tones, worked behind closed doors, and responded to her questions with tired smiles that never quite reached his eyes. Rosa kept arriving with concern, snacks, and cheerful conversation. Instead of easing Natalie, it now left her strangely more restless. Some evenings, Natalie sat alone in the nursery and spoke softly to the baby. "I want you to come into peace," she murmured, one hand on her stomach and the other resting on the rocking chair beside her. No confusion, no tension, just warmth. The baby's small movement made her smile for a moment, but the smile never lasted long. She did not know that in other corners of the house, gentle words were already being used against her future. The very people who reassured her most often had started imagining a life that slowly pushed her toward the edges of her own home. She felt the change, but not its full shape. The morning that changed everything arrived quietly. Natalie woke with a sore back, the soft weight of late pregnancy making every movement slower. Reuben was already dressed, standing near the mirror, fastening his watch. "You still have your prenatal appointment today?" he asked. "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "I'll stop by the baby store after, maybe pick up the blankets Jessie recommended." Reuben nodded and kissed her forehead. "Take it easy. I have an important call, so I'll stay back." Few minutes later, Rosa texted, "How are my favorite mother and baby today?" Natalie smiled and replied, "Tired but fine. I'll tell you how the appointment goes." Nothing about that morning felt unusual enough to be remembered with warning. Natalie ate lightly, spoke to the house staff, adjusted the soft scarf over her shoulders, and made her way slowly to the car. She carried that tender assumption most people carry through ordinary days, the belief that they will return to the same life they left an hour earlier. As the driver pulled away, she looked once through the window at the upper floor of the house and thought only of coming back to rest. The sky was calm, the road familiar, and the child inside her moved gently. She had no idea innocence had already begun slipping from her hands. Halfway to the clinic, Natalie reached into her handbag and froze. Her phone was missing. She checked again, then sighed softly. "I left it on the bedside table," she murmured. The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Should we continue, ma'am?" For a moment she considered it, but then she remembered Reuben was expecting an important business call and the hospital sometimes contacted her directly. "Let's turn back," she said. "It will only take a minute." The driver nodded and made a careful turn. Natalie leaned back, unaware that this small decision, made with such ordinary reasoning, had just altered the direction of her life. As the car returned through the gates, nothing seemed unusual from outside. The house stood quiet and polished, exactly as she had left it. Natalie stepped out slowly, one hand supporting her back, the other resting beneath her stomach. The stillness inside felt heavier than expected. No television, no footsteps, no staff voices drifting from the kitchen. She told herself everyone must simply be busy. Yet as she climbed the staircase, another sound reached her, soft laughter, intimate and unguarded, floating from upstairs. Her heart shifted in a way she could not explain. It was not a thought yet, only a chill. Still, she kept walking, not knowing her whole life waited behind one door. The hallway felt longer than she remembered. Natalie's breathing grew shallow as the laughter reached her again, softer now, followed by a low murmur she could not make out. She paused outside her bedroom door, her hand trembling slightly on the knob. Something deep inside her already knew, but her mind refused to receive it. For one more second, she wanted the world to still be ordinary. Then she opened the door. Time seemed to lose its shape. Reuben, Rosa, their faces lifting in horror, sheets pulled suddenly, silence falling like heavy cloth. Natalie stood there, unable to breathe fully, her eyes moving from one familiar face to the other as though they now belonged to strangers. Rosa was the first to speak. "Natalie," she whispered, but her voice broke. Reuben rose halfway, panic written across his face. "Listen to me," he said quickly. Natalie did not answer. She did not scream, cry, or throw anything. That frightened them more than anger would have. Her expression emptied in a way neither of them had ever seen. One hand moved to her stomach, almost as if shielding the baby from the sight before her. Then she stepped backward slowly, quietly, and turned away. Behind her, Reuben called her name again, but she kept walking. In that silence, something in Natalie's heart closed, and a stronger, colder part of her began to wake. Reuben and Rosa expected tears, confrontation, perhaps even calls to family before sunset. Instead, Natalie gave them almost nothing. She walked past the study, down the stairs, and out into the front garden where the afternoon light felt suddenly unreal. When Reuben hurried after her, she only said, "Please don't touch me." Her voice was soft, but the stillness in it stopped him. Rosa remained upstairs, crying in broken whispers no one answered. The driver, sensing the tension without understanding it, opened the car door quietly. Natalie sat inside, staring ahead. She did not ask to return to the clinic. She asked only to be driven around until she could breathe again. That evening she came back to the house and moved through it like a guest. Reuben tried to speak several times. "Natalie, please, let me explain." She looked at him once and replied, "Not tonight." The calmness in her tone unsettled him. Rosa sent messages filled with regret, but Natalie did not open them. Alone in the bathroom later, she rested both palms against the sink and let tears fall silently at last. Yet even in grief, a thought formed with surprising clarity. If she shattered loudly now, they would shape her pain into a story that favored them. So she held herself together. Beneath the shock, awareness was beginning to gather its first strength. The next morning, Natalie asked for the guest wing to be prepared. When the housekeeper looked confused, she smiled gently and said, "I need more rest before the baby comes." Reuben stood in the doorway as her things were moved. "You don't have to do this," he said carefully. Natalie folded a shawl and answered, "Actually, I do." Her voice remained steady, which made him even more uneasy. He offered to explain, to apologize, to take responsibility for a terrible mistake. Natalie did not argue. She simply closed the suitcase and walked past him. He had expected anger he could manage, not distance that gave him no place to stand. Once inside the quiet guest suite, Natalie locked the door and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She cried until her chest hurt, then washed her face, sat at the desk by the window, and opened the folder where she had been saving financial records. One by one, she spread out dates, receipts, transfers, and notes she had gathered over the past months. The pain in her heart remained sharp, but something colder had begun taking shape beside it. She was no longer only a wounded wife. She was becoming an observer. If there was more hidden beneath the betrayal she had seen, she would find it, carefully, quietly, and completely. As Natalie studied the records more closely, the pattern became impossible to dismiss. These were not harmless household adjustments or random errors buried in routine expenses. They were careful, repeated movements of money, small enough not to attract immediate attention, yet steady enough to reveal intention. Transfers had been disguised under vague labels, some linked to accounts Natalie did not recognize. She circled dates with a trembling hand and whispered, "This was planned." The realization settled heavily in her chest. What she had walked in on upstairs was not a sudden collapse of judgment. It had roots, structure, and a patience that made her feel colder than anger alone could. That thought changed the shape of her pain. Rosa had not merely crossed a line in a moment of weakness. She had likely been woven into something larger. Natalie remembered how often Rosa had offered to help with errands, how confidently she moved through the house, how easily she spoke of matters that did not concern her. Memory itself began to feel altered. She sat back in the chair, one hand over her belly, and whispered to the baby, "I will not let confusion touch you." Then she returned to the papers. If there was a deeper truth behind the affair, she would uncover it before anyone had the chance to use her tenderness against her. A few days later, Natalie arranged to meet Mike Doran, Reuben's longtime financial manager, under the simple excuse of reviewing maternity-related budgeting before the baby arrived. Mike came to the small sitting room with a tablet tucked under his arm and the careful expression of a man who already felt uneasy. "I just want to understand a few household transactions," Natalie said gently. Mike nodded, but his fingers tightened around the tablet. As she pointed to certain entries, he answered in cautious phrases. "Routine disbursement, temporary adjustment, private instruction from Mr. Vaughn." He revealed almost nothing directly, yet each careful word confirmed that there was more beneath the surface. Natalie watched him closely. Mike avoided her eyes whenever she asked about specific dates. Once, when she mentioned an account number she did not recognize, a flicker of alarm crossed his face before disappearing. "I'm sure there is a reasonable explanation," he said too quickly. Natalie offered a small, tired smile. "I hope so." When he left, the room felt heavier. Mike had not confessed anything, but his discomfort told her enough. Reuben was hiding financial truths, and other people knew it. Natalie sat still for a long while after the door closed. Intuition was no longer enough. Whatever was unfolding around her required protection stronger than hope. It was time to bring in someone skilled. Jesse Cole received Natalie in a quiet office with warm lighting, soft chairs, and the calm air of someone used to hearing difficult truths without interruption. Natalie had almost canceled twice on the drive there. Speaking the betrayal aloud felt like making it more real. But when Jesse looked at her and said, "Take your time," the words began to come. Natalie spoke about the affair, the suspicious transactions, Mike's discomfort, and the strange feeling that what she had discovered in the bedroom was only part of a larger design. Jesse listened carefully, not once rushing her, only making notes with the steady focus of someone beginning to see a pattern. When Natalie finished, Jessie leaned back and folded her hands. "This is not only infidelity," she said quietly. "This feels structured." Natalie's throat tightened. "You mean he planned more than leaving me?" Jessie gave a small nod. "Men like your husband rarely begin with emotion. They begin with positioning." Those words stayed in the room long after they were spoken. Jesse advised Natalie to remain calm, gather every record, keep every message, and reveal nothing until they understood the full shape of the situation. Natalie left the office shaken, but clearer than before. For the first time, she fully understood that Reuben might already be building a story meant to weaken her. Over the following week, Jesse helped Natalie review more than bank records. They went through messages, home camera backups, and files Natalie had not thought to question before. Slowly, a more painful truth emerged. Ruben had saved voice notes from nights when Natalie cried in exhaustion. He had kept short videos of her during moments of pregnancy stress, little clips she thought were private or even affectionate at the time. "You looked tired that day," Jesse said carefully, pausing at one recording. Natalie remembered the moment. She had been in pain, tearful, asking Reuben to stay home with her. He had held the phone calmly and told her to breathe. That memory, once tender in her mind, now felt altered beyond repair. Jesse placed the file aside and spoke softly. "He may have been collecting selective evidence." Natalie closed her eyes. "To make me look unstable." Jesse did not answer immediately, but the silence itself was enough. Worse still, there were messages from Rosa offering suggestions about how to handle Natalie's episodes, framing ordinary pregnancy emotions as signs of weakness. Natalie pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed by a sorrow deeper than heartbreak. This was not just betrayal of love. It was betrayal of trust at its gentlest points. Her tears had been watched, saved, and quietly turned into tools that might one day have been used against her. The discovery that truly changed Natalie's fear came from hospital paperwork. Jesse reviewed the documents slowly, then looked up with a seriousness that made Natalie's stomach tighten. Reuben had arranged for certain authorizations to give him broad influence over post-delivery decisions if Natalie became too exhausted, medicated, or emotionally distressed to respond clearly. On the surface, the forms could be explained as practical preparation, but paired with everything else, the intent felt different. "He wanted control when you would be at your weakest," Jesse said softly. Natalie stared at the page, her fingers going cold. Suddenly, the carefully chosen hospital, the private room, the restricted visitors, all of it felt less caring than planned. For the first time, her fear stopped being about marriage and became entirely about her child. Natalie rested both hands over her stomach and whispered, "He will not touch my future through this baby." The maternal certainty in her own voice surprised her. She was still hurt, still grieving, but something fierce had risen beneath the sorrow. Jesse immediately began outlining protective steps, revised medical instructions, changed authorizations, restricted access, independent notes from Natalie's doctor. By the end of the meeting, Natalie no longer hoped Reuben would explain himself sincerely. That hope had gone quiet. In its place stood something far steadier, the determination to guard her child and herself from a plan built on her supposed helplessness. Rosa finally asked to meet in person. Her messages had grown longer each day, filled with regret, confusion, and pleas for one chance to explain. Jesse advised caution, but Natalie agreed, wanting to see Rosa's face now that the fog had lifted. They met in a quiet cafe just before evening. Rosa arrived with swollen eyes and trembling hands. Nat, I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered the moment she sat down. Natalie folded her hands in her lap and said, then start with the truth. Rosa cried softly, speaking of loneliness, weakness, and feeling seen at the wrong time. She described the affair as though it had drifted into existence without intent. Natalie listened without interruption, and that silence seemed to trouble Rosa more than anger would have. Beneath the tears, Natalie noticed something else: fear. Not only fear of losing a friendship, but fear of being exposed. When Natalie asked quietly, "Did you help him move money?" Rosa's eyes widened before she looked away. "I don't know what you mean." That tiny break in composure told Natalie more than any confession could. This had not been one careless mistake covered in shame. It had been participation, deliberate, secret, and persistent. When the meeting ended, Rosa reached across the table. "Please don't throw our years away." Natalie stood slowly and answered, "You already did." Then she walked out, leaving Rosa to cry alone. After the meeting with Rosa, Reuben became more active in his performance of remorse. Began stopping by the guest wing with tea, fruit, and carefully softened expressions. "You need peace," he would say. "Stress isn't good for the baby." One evening he stood by the window while Natalie folded infant clothes and said, "Rosa means nothing to me. It was a terrible mistake. Please don't let one terrible mistake destroy everything we built." Natalie kept folding. "What exactly do you think we built?" she asked without looking up. Reuben hesitated, then answered, "A home, a future, a family." His voice sounded gentle enough, but Natalie heard calculation beneath the softness now. She let him keep talking. That was the part that unsettled him most, her refusal to argue. He mistook it for weakness at first. He believed her silence meant she was too heartbroken to think clearly, too fragile to see through him. So his confidence slowly returned. He spoke of repair, forgiveness, and protecting the baby from public embarrassment. "We can handle this quietly," he said. Natalie finally looked at him then, her gaze calm and unreadable. Quietly for whom? Reuben had no good answer. Still, he smiled as though time was on his side. He did not understand that every gentle word he offered now only strengthened Natalie's certainty about the kind of man standing in her doorway. A week later, Reuben arrived carrying a slim folder and the practiced sadness of a man about to do something cruel while calling it reasonable. He sat across from Natalie and placed the papers carefully on the small table between them. "I've been thinking about what is best for your health," he began. "This situation is too heavy for you, especially now. An amicable arrangement would protect everyone." Natalie did not touch the folder at first. "What kind of arrangement?" she asked. Reuben inhaled slowly. "A temporary separation, clear terms, stability until after the baby is born." The softness of his voice made the moment feel colder than open hostility ever could. When Natalie finally opened the papers, she understood the deeper insult. Hidden inside the language of peace were clauses that shifted control, finances, property access, decision-making leverage after childbirth. If she signed in confusion or sorrow, she would hand him exactly what he had been quietly preparing to take. Natalie looked up slowly. "You want me to trust you now?" Reuben leaned forward. "I want us to avoid unnecessary damage." She closed the folder and placed it back in front of him. "No," she said simply. Not angry, not loud, just certain. For the first time, Reuben's expression changed. He had expected tears, hesitation, maybe even desperate compromise. He had not expected calm refusal. From that day forward, something in Natalie settled into quiet steel. The sorrow remained. Some nights she still cried into her pillow until dawn thinned the darkness. But even grief had changed. It was no longer shapeless pain. It had edges now, purpose now. With Jesse's help, Natalie began taking measured steps to protect herself. Vulnerable financial channels were secured. Sensitive documents were moved. Medical instructions were rewritten. Each signature she placed on the right paper felt like reclaiming one small piece of ground beneath her feet. She did not enjoy any of it. There was no triumph in these tasks, only necessity and the deep, aching knowledge of why such care had become necessary. Emotionally, she began mourning more than the marriage. She mourned the trusting woman she had been inside it, the one who believed loyalty once given was sacred. "I miss who I was before this," she admitted to Jesse one afternoon. Jesse's voice softened. "You are still her, just no longer unguarded." Natalie looked down at her stomach, where life still moved quietly beneath her hands, and felt the truth of change settle in her chest. One life was coming into the world, and another version of herself was fading away. She did not become bitter, but she did become clearer. And clarity, once fully born, could not be persuaded back into innocence. Raphael Vaughn had always been one of the few people Reuben truly respected. He was an older man with a calm, stern presence and the rare ability to unsettle people simply by noticing what others ignored. When he visited the house and found Natalie living in the guest wing, his eyes rested on her longer than usual. Later, as staff cleared teacups from the sitting room, he said quietly, "You have become too thin in the face." Natalie offered a polite smile. "Pregnancy has been tiring." Raphael nodded once, but his expression said he was not convinced. Before leaving, he added, "If there is truth being hidden in this house, it never stays hidden forever." His words lingered with Natalie long after he left. He was not a man given to gossip or emotional display. If he had noticed tension, then Reuben's carefully polished image was already beginning to crack. A few days later, Raphael called and asked if Natalie would join him for lunch somewhere private. She agreed, though cautiously. He did not press her with questions at first. He only said, "I know my nephew well enough to recognize when his silence is not clean." Natalie lowered her eyes, feeling something between relief and sorrow. She did not reveal everything yet, but she understood one thing clearly. When the time came, Raphael's judgment would matter deeply. Reuben had built himself on admiration. Losing Raphael's respect would wound him where appearances could not. Labor came in the middle of a rain-soaked night, long and exhausting, soft in its beginning and relentless by morning. Natalie held the bedrail, breath trembling, every wave of pain pulling something fierce and ancient from deep inside her. Jesse's preparations meant the hospital staff followed Natalie's instructions carefully, and Reuben's influence did not reach where it had been meant to. When the child finally arrived, crying with bright, insistent life, Natalie burst into tears of a different kind. The nurse laid the baby against her chest, and Natalie whispered, "You are mine to protect." That moment, after all the sorrow, the child felt like living proof that not everything tied to Reuben had ended in harm. Reuben came to the hospital carrying flowers and the same softened remorse he had been wearing for weeks. He stood near the bed and looked at the baby with moist eyes. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. Natalie did not answer immediately. She adjusted the blanket around the child and said, "The nurse will explain visiting arrangements." Reuben seemed startled. "Natalie, I'm her father." She finally met his gaze. "And I am her mother." The simplicity of the words closed the space between them more firmly than anger could have. Reuben remained by the door a moment longer, then left with the flowers still in his hands. Natalie watched him go without regret. Whatever tenderness remained in her had changed direction now. Weeks after the birth, when the baby had begun sleeping longer stretches and the house had settled into a softer rhythm, Natalie surprised everyone by sending invitations to a private dinner. Both families were included, along with a few close associates who had known her and Reuben as a couple. The wording was warm, almost gracious, thanking them for their support during a difficult season and inviting them to share an evening of reflection and new beginnings. Reuben read the card twice, then smiled to himself for the first time in days. "She wants peace," he murmured. Rosa, receiving her own invitation with shaking hands, told herself perhaps Natalie was too proud to expose anything publicly. But peace was not what Natalie had prepared. In the quiet days leading up to the dinner, Jesse visited discreetly with sealed envelopes, organized documents, and carefully marked timelines. Every message, transfer, recording, and hospital revision had been placed in order, not for drama but for clarity. Natalie reviewed each item while her baby slept beside her, and sometimes her hands trembled, not from doubt but from the emotional weight of speaking truth where love had once lived. "Are you sure?" Jesse asked the night before. Natalie looked toward the nursery and nodded. "They thought silence meant surrender. Tomorrow they will learn the difference." The house remained calm, but beneath that calm, a storm waited with perfect patience. The dinner began with soft music, warm lighting, and the careful politeness families wear when they sense unspoken tension. Reuben moved through the room with controlled ease, greeting guests as though reconciliation were already quietly underway. Rosa arrived later than the others, pale and anxious, but trying to appear composed. Natalie entered last, carrying her newborn in a cream blanket, and for a moment the room softened around the sight of mother and child together. She thanked everyone for coming, her voice even and gracious. "This season has taught me many things," she said. "Tonight I want truth to stand where confusion has stood too long." Then she nodded once to Jesse, who quietly began handing sealed envelopes around the room. The shift was immediate. Pages opened. Eyes widened. Silence deepened. Bank transfers, messages, recordings, legal drafts, timelines, evidence not only of the affair, but of the quiet strategy built around Natalie's pregnancy and vulnerability. Reuben stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate," he said, reaching toward one envelope. Natalie's voice remained calm. "No, what was inappropriate happened long before tonight." Rosa began crying before anyone addressed her. One of Reuben's older relatives covered her mouth in disbelief. Another set the papers down slowly and looked at him as though seeing a stranger. Natalie did not raise her voice. She simply stood there with her baby in her arms while truth, patient and undeniable, did the speaking she had been denied for months. Reuben tried to recover control of the room, but the confidence that usually carried him was gone. "You are twisting private pain into spectacle," he said, his voice tight with effort. But even he seemed to hear how weak the words sounded against the evidence in front of everyone. Raphael, who had read every page in silence, finally lifted his eyes and looked at him. That gaze alone changed the air. "Did you collect your wife's tears as strategy?" he asked quietly. Reuben opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a man who had built himself on image and composure, the inability to answer was devastating. Shame entered the room, and this time it was his. Reactions moved slowly, which made them more painful. Reuben's aunt turned her chair away from him. A business associate set his envelope down and said nothing at all, which somehow felt harsher than spoken judgment. Rosa cried openly, but no one moved to comfort her. The polished man they had admired was no longer standing in the room. In his place was someone smaller, colder, and impossible to excuse. Reuben looked toward Natalie once, perhaps hoping to find softness there, some private mercy. But Natalie only held her child more securely and kept her face calm. Public admiration, he learned too late, can take years to build and only one honest night to lose forever. When Rosa finally found enough breath to speak, her voice came in broken pieces. "I was lonely," she whispered. "I was confused. I never meant for any of this to grow so far." Natalie listened, but her expression did not change. The evidence in the envelopes had already done what words could not. Rosa was not being seen as a woman who made one sorrowful mistake. She was being seen as someone who participated, advised, concealed, and remained close enough to Natalie to keep gathering trust even while betraying it. That truth settled around the room with painful finality. Whatever sympathy her tears might once have earned had already slipped quietly beyond reach. For Rosa, the deepest loss was not merely exposure. It was the collapse of the fantasy she had lived inside. She had convinced herself the affair could be explained as emotion, the planning as necessity, the betrayal as something softer than it was. Now Natalie's calm made that self-deception impossible. After the guests began leaving, Rosa approached her one last time and whispered, "Please, don't let this be the end of us." Natalie looked at her with tired, immeasurable sadness. "The end of us did not happen tonight," she said. "It happened the first time you smiled in my face while helping him plan against me." Rosa stepped back as though the words themselves had weight. In that moment, she truly understood what she had lost. In the days that followed, the consequences Natalie had quietly prepared began unfolding with calm precision. Disputed assets were frozen under Jesse's direction. Access points Reuben had hoped to use after childbirth were cut off. Revised custody protection stood firmly in place. Natalie also moved her inherited properties and personal accounts beyond his reach, not in secrecy, but in lawful clarity. There was no dramatic celebration in any of it. She signed where needed, answered careful questions, and let the process do its work. Jesse watched her once across a conference table and said, You are handling this with remarkable discipline." Natalie replied softly, "Discipline is all that kept them from deciding my future for me." For Rosa, Natalie did not fight, insult, or publicly continue the story. She simply ended access completely. No calls, no explanations, no late apology meetings. Finality can be quieter than anger, but it often lasts longer. Reuben tried repeatedly to reopen emotional doors. "We can still settle this with dignity," he said during one legal exchange. Natalie answered through Jesse, not through him. That distance unsettled him more than confrontation ever had. She had dealt with both of them not by losing herself in pain, but by refusing to leave her tomorrow in the hands of people who had tried to shape it for their own comfort. Control, once slipping away, had returned fully to her grasp. Months later, Natalie moved into a smaller, quieter home with her baby. It did not have the vast halls or polished staircases of the mansion she had left behind, but every room felt honest. Morning light entered gently through cream curtains, and the soft sounds of her child waking became the music of a life she was slowly rebuilding. Sometimes grief still came unexpectedly, in the middle of folding laundry, while warming milk, while remembering a version of love she had once believed in completely. But the silence here did not threaten her. It held her. It asked for nothing false. In that home, pain and peace learned to exist beside each other without confusion. Reuben's name still moved through certain circles, but never with the same admiration. People greeted him politely, yet trust had drained quietly from the image he once relied on. Rosa became a cautionary whisper, someone remembered not for joy but for what disloyalty can cost. Natalie, however, no longer measured her healing by either of them. She was learning something deeper. Surviving betrayal is not about becoming who you were before. It is about becoming wiser without becoming hard. One evening, rocking her child to sleep, she whispered, "We are safe now." The words were simple, but they carried months of sorrow, strength, and a tenderness that had survived without surrendering its dignity. By the time the baby was old enough to laugh at sunlight spilling across the floor, Natalie understood her story differently. Ruben and Rosa had broken trust, yes, but the deeper wound had been their quiet belief that they could also break her future. They had counted on pregnancy, tenderness, and shock to leave her unprepared. Instead, those very things had sharpened her love into protection and her pain into clarity. One afternoon, standing by the window with her child against her shoulder, Natalie thought of the woman who had once stepped into that bedroom and felt her whole world stop. She mourned her still, but she no longer wished to return to her. The ending of her story was not revenge. It was distance, truth, and a life rebuilt on steadier ground. Reuben remained part of legal arrangements where necessary, but never again part of her inner world. Rosa belonged to memory now, and memory no longer held power over the shape of Natalie's days. As evening settled around the quiet home, Natalie kissed her child's forehead and whispered, "They thought they were ending our story." Then she smiled softly through the ache of all she had survived. "They only forced us to begin again." And in that beginning, scarred, wiser, and still tender, Natalie found a strength neither betrayal nor planning had been able to take away. We've come to the end of the story. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification. Thank you so much for watching.